This is Seattle Real Estate Radio with your hosts, Christian Nossum.
Well, when you're selling, you got to know who your buyer is, and you got to know how to market to them. I do.
And Dan Keller, mortgage expert with New American Funding.
Hey, rates are important, but strategy matters more than ever.
For the next hour, you'll learn impactful insider information as Christian and Dan teach about the ins and outs of Seattle's real estate market. Now, here's Christian and Dan.
You know what? I am not Christian.
No.
But we kind of look alike, right?
Yeah, filling in. Christian took off on actually, you know what? Christian's been fired. You did so well last week, we brought you back again. No, my co-host, Christian Awesome, is actually out of town again, so spending some time with the family, wrapping up summer. So it is Dan Keller with New American Funding. That's me, and you are Les Cutting.
With the Awesome Nossum Group.
With the Awesome Nossum Group. And he's got a great radio voice. But, hey, we just want to welcome you. Happy Monday or Saturday if you're listening to this on a replay. We are live every single Monday from 3 to 4. And every single Saturday from 5 to 6, we replay our Monday show.
Right. Well, I am super happy to be here. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah.
I don't know how you deal with me, but it's cool. It's cool.
You're good, man.
Yeah.
You're good.
We have an awesome show today.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk probate today.
Yeah.
We have a guest, Stacy Romberg, coming in. Also, let's talk about something. So I read something in the Globe and Mail, an article. It says Vancouver's housing prices are booming and more people are looking to get condos, right? Mm-hmm. But here's the problem with condos in Vancouver. A lot of them are set on the fault line, which means when that big quake hits, they're going down.
They're going down.
Bye-bye. Yes, sir. So, leads me into this.
Yeah.
Do condos ever need to have earthquake insurance or retrofitting for a buyer to get funding?
Throwing a hard one at me. About a 98-mile-an-hour fastball, right? You know, it is a great question. I would say that most condos here in Seattle have what is referred to as an HOA. You pay homeowners association dues, and part of that dues is insurance. There's a master policy for the condo.
Right.
Okay. And then you also are required, at least at my bank, and I know most banks require this, if not all, because agencies require it. They require what's called HO6 insurance, and that's walls-in coverage. Okay, we did have a very good real estate agent, insurance agent on the show not too long ago, and she spoke about that. But so as far as So I guess your question would be such that if an earthquake happened and a high-rise condo was destroyed, what would happen to your mortgage?
Right.
Is that kind of what you're...
Right.
Yeah, so I know the master policy obviously would cover some reconstruction costs. Your HO6 policy would cover the interior. Okay. But that's a really good question, great question for an insurance agent that specializes in commercial or condo complexes in regards to master policies. Okay. What the heck would happen? I mean, if a high-rise was destroyed, there's going to be a lot of issues. Right. I've thought about this numerous times. 9/11, the Twin Towers falling.
Right.
How many first off, how many lives were lost? How many businesses were lost? And real estate in general was destroyed. Right. And I don't yet see two towers in their place, correct?
Right.
So I don't know. I mean, that's kind of a question that part of it I can answer, part of it's out of, I guess, my pay scale, over my pay scale. I don't know how that would look. I know at the end of the day, life goes on and your mortgage, the bank's going to come after you if you don't make your payment, dead or alive, right?
Right.
So that's a great question. I'm actually going to write some notes on that. You put me on the spot. I'm going to write some notes, do some research, and I will get back to all of our listeners on that.
Well, speaking of condos, did you know, Dan Keller?
Did I know?
The top 10 tiniest condos in Seattle measure under 500 square feet, and they cost around $220,000 to $334,000. Let me ask you this.
Tiny condos.
Would you jump into tiny home fad?
I don't like anything tiny, man. I go big. You know that. I go big.
I hear you.
Sakes. No, 500 feet. I think my office is 500 feet. How would you live in that? That'd be tough.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
So let me read that stat again. Top 10 tiniest condos in Seattle measure under 500 feet and cost around $200,000 to $300,000, $334,000. Would you jump into a tiny home fad? The tiny home fad is, I don't want to say I don't know if it's a fad. I know it's there's a show about it and everything, tiny homes. And
Yeah.
actually I got asked by HGTV to be on the show or to run a segment in regards to financing. And I just said, I don't.
Look at you.
Yeah. Well, I turned it down. I haven't financed a tiny home, and most tiny home, you've got to, in order to do what I do and finance residential real estate, it has to be attached to land. So some of them, whether they are or are not attached to land, that's the big question. But I'm not going to go on TV and talk about something I don't know anything about. Come on,
I hear you.
I want to. If I'm going to go on, feature me as the Seattle, go-to Seattle mortgage professional that you need to go to for X, not for tiny homes.
I hear you. I hear you.
But that's a crazy stat.
So this past weekend, you celebrated your son's birthday,
Dude, it was pretty cool.
Yeah, I saw some of the pictures.
Yeah. So if you're listening and you know anything about me or my wife's a pretty big party planner, pretty big event planner, party planner. I would say parties, but she works with brands. She's blown up so big. She's a brand ambassador, and so for a lot of big brands out there. And so, kind of tying it in with Hudson's 8th birthday party. Hudson loves baseball, so we went out and went to the Boys and Girls Club, local Boys and Girls Club. Wrote them a nice little charitable donation, and they allowed us to use their field on a Sunday night for a party. Yeah, it was really neat. So. We did baseball-themed 8th birthday party for Hudson, and Jenny just knocked it off and just knocked it out of the park. The party was phenomenal. So instead of a cake, check this out. Instead of a cake, she did a float bar. So, like a root beer float. So she had like root beer, cherry Coke, orange soda, cherry soda, strawberry soda, and so you could mix those.
Oh, he had the works.
Oh, dude, it was cool. And all the kids. I mean, the kids were, it was pretty cool. So. Right. Yeah, we did that. I threw a bunch of batting practice for the kids, and then, the adults got to take a little BP at the end and live up some glory days. Live out some of the glory days of hitting home runs. So, no, it was really good. It was a great weekend. I know Awesome was there. Yeah. So, and his 2 little runs for running around was really cool.
I saw your form, man. You need some work.
You saw my form?
Yeah, man.
That was a hack, bro. I think I went upper deck over the gym, and then I stopped playing around, and I said, "Fine, I'm just going to go dead center." And I launched a line drive. The field was like 220, 250 to center field. And so, but anyways, man, it was good time. So
definitely.
But talk to us. One of the reasons why I really love this show is getting to talk with you and Christian every single week about the the real estate market and what's going on. So what are we seeing in the market right now?
What are we seeing in the market? We are seeing a lot of things. In particular, we're going back to tight inventory. Really tight inventory.
Coming into this fall, you think?
Coming into this fall.
Okay.
And there's multiple reasons for that. Back to school, so people, want to slow down, or at least get the kids back to school, not start the process, a lot of people are on vacation too. They're going to finish those out. So that's what's happening right now.
Okay. As far as Seattle,
same stuff, new days.
Same stuff.
New
inventory. Day. So the message needs to be that it's still, we want your house. Essentially, we want your house on the market. We need inventory. If you're thinking about selling, don't wait until the spring. There's no better time than now. If you're thinking about selling,
people are getting those astronomical prices.
Yeah.
There's buyers out there. There are tons of buyers out there.
I'm seeing it. I'm still seeing my clients. There's multiple offers.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
just not enough houses. Right.
So, if you're thinking about listing your house, contact Christian, contact Les, and have them give you a what's called a CMA or a comparative market analysis and see what your home's really worth and what you can get for it.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So I'm reading a stat here that our production manager put together for us, and it's on the overall housing market in the U.S. And the question is, have we made a complete recovery? I read a stat in addition to this. So to answer your question, and this is good for our viewers, listeners, I read a stat the other day that 7 out of 10 homeowners in America have 20% equity. They just don't know it.
Interesting.
That's crazy.
That
It's 30%.
That is huge.
Yeah, or 70%, excuse me. That's crazy.
Wow.
So that means approximately 30% don't have 20% equity, but that doesn't mean they're underwater.
Right.
So,
Right.
that was kind of a unique stat. But I know here in the Seattle, let's just say Western Washington, I'm just looking at numbers. I own properties in 2 different counties. I know that the market has certainly recovered to, in Snohomish County, it has recovered to right at pre-crash market.
Let me ask you this.
Pre-crash.
Do you think we're on a bubble?
I do not. No.
Okay.
I do not, because you got to look at the pre-crash and you got to look what caused that, and it was artificial money.
Right.
And so it was people qualifying for mortgages that had no business qualifying for mortgages. I wasn't in the industry at that time, so I can't tell you how that looks. But if you bought a home prior to 2006,
right.
2007, you know that there was very limited income and asset documentation.
As long as you had a pulse, you can get a house.
I heard that. So here's the thing. I can tell you, since I got in the mortgage industry at the end of 2008, middle end of 2008, that every single client, and this is industry wide, had to qualify for the mortgage, meaning there were credit score guidelines that they had to meet. There were income and employment guidelines they had to meet. There were down payment guidelines that they had to meet. So they've got skin in the game, but they're qualified to make this purchase. So no, I absolutely do not think we're in a bubble. I do think that we are in a jobs bubble right now, which is good, but I think jobs will slow down. But I don't think that housing bubble. No, I think we are in just a massive. We have a massive amount of growth in regards to the jobs market, which is healthy, which is good. That will slow down. I guarantee that will slow down.
Right.
When it slows down, people are going to think the sky is falling and that the market's slowing down. No, but when that slows down, the housing market will cool off.
Yeah.
Jobs pushes housing.
Right.
So,
Absolutely. Well, today I'm excited. We have Stacy Romberg, a probate attorney. So we're going to talk that here in a little bit.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, she's going to be a huge resource. So I want you all to stay tuned. We're going to take a break here in a second. Stacy will be back with Stacy talking probate. And, every time we have somebody like this, a professional like this on here, I just learned a ton. So stay tuned. We'll be back here in a moment with Stacy Romberg.
We're back with more Seattle Real Estate Radio with your hosts, Christian Nossum and Dan Keller.
All right, hey, welcome back to Seattle Real Estate Radio here on KKOL 1300 AM. We are here today with Stacy Romberg. I'm really excited to talk with Stacy. She's a probate attorney, and we're going to learn a lot about probate law, I guess, today. So one of the things I want to do real quickly for our listeners, so you guys have a better idea of who Stacy actually is. Stacy Romberg is a Seattle attorney practicing law in the areas of probate, estate planning, and business law. She's a native of Idaho, where she attended Idaho State University on a tennis scholarship, before getting her law degree from the University of Idaho and LL.M. degree from Georgetown University Law Center. Did I butcher that?
No, that was excellent. You did a great job.
All right. Stacy proudly serves on the board of a Seattle area non-for-profit tennis outreach programs, TOPS, and we are really, really excited to have her here today.
We are. So you are from the Palouse. You went to school? You went to school in the Palouse.
I went to school in the Palouse.
Yeah, I went to school in the Palouse too. I went to WSU though, so I mean, right there.
Neighbors.
There. Yeah, exactly. So we're really excited to have you on the show today. One thing is, so you have great reviews on Yelp, and when I drive around every weekend, I see estate sale and probate. And could you explain to our audience what is probate?
Sure, absolutely. So every time that someone dies, their estate needs to be administered in some way. Mm-hmm. So who's in charge?
Right.
Who gets what? What assets do they receive? And that's going to be governed by one of three things, which is, one, their will, if they have one. Mm-hmm. If they don't have one, it'll be governed by intestate succession. And what that is it's a statutory scheme about who receives your property. Or if someone has a revocable living trust, that'll govern who gets what and who's in charge.
Okay.
So my job, really, as a probate attorney, I'm doing one of two things. One, I'm helping the fiduciary, the person in charge, I'm helping them figure out what they're supposed to do in managing the estate.
Okay.
And on the flip side of the coin, what I might be doing is representing a beneficiary who might be a little bit cranky, who might think that things aren't being done appropriately, and feels like they need counsel to help them.
So how do you deal with that when the emotions are so high in situations like that, when you have to handle the beneficiary?
It can be very difficult. You know, I'm thinking about a situation a while ago that one of my colleagues billed, honestly, over $21,000, he had told me, because the family was fighting over a china set that was worth about $4,000.
Wow.
And he continued to present the bills to his clients, continued to say, this is irrational. I would prefer not to be doing this. I think this should be settled. And it was just, you know, the principle of the thing that they had to continue on and fight about that. So I think it's really important to explain to the clients that, you know, some things are just not worth going to the mat over.
Right.
Because the fees are too high, it's too difficult, or maybe they don't even have a very strong legal basis for their argument.
Right. Okay. So can you give us a brief description of the probate process, and, you know, how long does it take?
Probate, at its minimum, here in Washington, will take 4 months.
Wow.
4 months from the date of appointment. And why 4 months? Is because that is the time after the personal representative is appointed. There is a notice to creditors that's published, and probably a lot of you have seen that. You know, in the little newspapers, you'll see these creditor notices and think, "What's that?" But from the date of publication, the creditors have 4 months to raise their claims, so you have to wait and give them that 4-month period.
Okay.
And then, provided everything else is done in terms of, you know, dealing with the assets, dealing with any tax issues that need to be done, et cetera, it can go ahead and be closed.
Right. Okay. So say I had a spouse and I died. How do you deal with that when one person dies in with probate and whatnot?
When one person dies and you're married.
Right.
And I mean, there's so many different factors to that.
Right.
You know, do you have a will? Do you not have a will?
Okay.
In the very easiest scenario, or one of the easiest ones that I like to see, is the idea husband and wife, they have gone to an attorney. They have a non-taxable estate, meaning no Washington estate tax, no federal estate tax owed. They've entered into a community property agreement, which is a very short agreement that their attorney helped them with that simply says, you know, what's mine is yours, what yours is mine. People think that's automatic. Oh, well, of course it's community property. Not necessarily.
Oh.
So having that sort of agreement is really important. And if you have that agreement, oftentimes you can go ahead, you can record the community property agreement and record a quitclaim deed.
Okay.
And voila, the property is yours.
Oh,
That's
wow.
the simplest thing. If people do that, I'm always so happy that they can take that step. But other times it may be, you know, that a full probate is needed in order to transfer title.
Okay.
So I heard you say will. That's the importance of having a will. If you have a will, it makes your job much easier. It makes the process much easier, right?
Yes. And oftentimes people are nervous because they don't want to spend the money for a will.
Yep.
And they spend so much more money because they didn't have it.
Yeah. Ouch. Yep.
So how messy can things get without a will?
Oh, my gosh. I have so many different examples of things that... one example that I think is really compelling that I've seen a number of times in my practice is, suppose, again, husband and wife.
Okay.
And a lot of times, you know, folks live together and they're living in a house that one person or the other inherited from their parents. So an inheritance, generally speaking, is your separate property.
Okay.
So let's suppose the wife got the house from the parents. The husband and wife have been living in the house for 30 years. The husband just assumes that it's his house too. You know, they're continuing on. They don't get wills.
Right.
She dies. She has children from a prior marriage. Guess what? Pursuant to the laws of the intestate succession that I referenced before, that house is actually split. So half of it is going to belong to the husband that survived, and the other half is going to belong to the kids from the prior marriage. So what do? Does the husband have enough money? to pay off the kids in terms of their share of the equity in that house. Hopefully he does, so that he can continue to live there. But if he doesn't, guess what? Then you have to sell the house.
Right.
And you have to split the proceeds, which is probably the last thing that either that husband or that wife ever would have thought would have happened, and not what anybody would have wanted, but they didn't do proper preparation.
Right. And so what I'm hearing you say, you need to prepare for these types of situations. I feel like this is a situation where people kind of put it on the back burner, and
I'm nodding
when it
yes.
when it actually comes into play, when the situation does happen, is like, oh, what do we do now? And it's like everyone's scrambling to try to get everything figured out. So yeah, it's pretty difficult. Wow. So if you don't have a large estate, do you still need a probate attorney?
Well, there is a statutory mechanism here in Washington to allow for estate administration without a probate for estates that are under $100,000. But nonetheless, you still really need to contact an attorney no matter what, because you need to find out what's going on. And a lot of times people, it's great to DIY, do it, on your own for, maybe fixing your floor.
Right.
It's not a good DIY situation for some of these estate administration cases. And you can really make some serious mistakes that cost a lot of money to clean up.
Right. So if you're buying a home that is in the probate process, what can a buyer expect?
Oh my gosh.
Can a house even go on the market in the probate process?
Yes.
Okay.
And it should. I mean, once a personal representative has been appointed by the court, which is an important point.
Right.
Because sometimes people just assume, oh, grandma died. Her will says I'm the personal representative.
Right.
I guess I'm the personal representative. Right. No, you aren't. You're not the personal representative unless a judge says that you are.
Right.
And you have a court order that says that you are. So once you have that court order in hand, and that court order says one magical thing, which is non-intervention powers. And that means basically that you can proceed in a normal way without having to run back to court all the time and say, Mother, may I do this or that.
Right.
So once you have that in hand, it's a great idea, if you can prepare the house for sale and get it sold.
Okay.
So the biggest question is, if we find a house, or if I've got a client that comes to me and wants to buy a house that's in probate, the big question would be like, what part of the process are you in? Because you're saying it can last up to 4 months.
It can even last years.
Or years, got it. So which part of the process are you in? What part of the process are you in? Where we're at? What are some other questions that we could ask?
I think what part of the process that you're in, the most important thing, if from the buyer's perspective, because one, does the personal representative, have they been appointed? Are they able to sell? They can be appointed on day 2. They can be appointed, 3 years into the process.
So assuming the home is listed, they should have the right to list it.
Yes.
So at that point, then there's numerous variables, like you just mentioned.
Right.
And they have to be really careful because they have to realize it's not a normal sale.
Yeah.
Right.
My job as a probate attorney is to protect my personal representatives. And I tell my clients, I said, that's not your house. Yeah. So you shouldn't take on any of the responsibilities that a normal seller has in a purchase and sale transaction. So what do I mean by that? Specifically, all through the process, from the listing agreement to the purchase and sale agreement, down to the deed, I just really want that buttoned up to make it clear that the personal representative is making no warranties whatsoever about that property.
Right.
Simply,
so is that you that then you would be helping them, advising them to complete those forms then?
Exactly. Yeah. I work very closely with the real estate agents on all steps of the process.
And in this case, there's no seller's disclosure either. For the most part, they're all
correct.
They're waived.
And that makes sense, actually, when you think it through, because how could you be really expected to disclose something in a house that's not yours?
Exactly.
So just buying it as is, correct?
Right.
So it's so important for the buyers to take that extra step and realize that, and really make sure that they're inspecting the property well, that they make sure, if there's any sort of, boundary issues or encroachments or things like that, they can't come back and say, well, gosh, seller, that's your responsibility, because it's really not.
Right.
They have to get it figured out.
Exactly. So in a situation like this, that's when they have to really read that title report, because it's not a typical title report. So they have to go through it, scour it, and get with the title company, have them explain what different things mean to, so they have a clear understanding of what they're getting into.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. So taxes. Doing the last tax return, how does that relate to homes and a real estate aspect?
What I think you might be saying is that yes, taxes still have to be done when somebody is deceased.
Right.
Let's do this because I want to jump in on this because this is important, and we're getting prompted to go to break. So let's do this. Let's address this question when we come back. How does that sound?
That sounds great.
Okay, we'll be back here in a minute. Stay tuned for more with Stacy Romberg.
We're back with more Seattle Real Estate Radio with your hosts, Christian Nossum and Dan Keller.
I am not Christian Nossum, but I'm Les Cutting with the Awesome Nossum Group, and we are here with Stacy Romberg, attorney at law. She's a probate attorney, and we're talking probate.
We are, and it's not. I wouldn't say it's not a sexy topic, but it's a very important topic.
Very important.
Death is sexy.
Right? No, but it's seriously like I drive around neighborhoods so many, like every weekend, estate sale. Mm-hmm. So it happens a lot, more times than not. But it's like I said, it's an issue that people put on the back burner and they don't want to talk about. But when the time comes, what do you do? Yeah. And that's why we have Stacy here to guide us in the right direction.
Well, we were talking right before we went to break in regards to some, tax issues. So, for example, let's say there are taxes owed on the property, back taxes, property taxes. Explain to us how that's handled.
Well, ideally, that's a estate-related expense, so that those taxes should be paid out of estate assets. Okay. And that's one thing that's very important, I think, as part of your pre-planning, as part of your estate planning, because, there's unfortunately, a lot of folks that die, and they're sort of, real property rich and cash poor, and they don't have a lot of money in their estate to take care of things, which is when life insurance becomes particularly important.
Oh.
But otherwise, if the state is lacking in funds, hopefully there are family members that are able to pony up the funds and be able to pay that and then receive the funds back once the property sells.
Yeah, so there's numerous ways where you could approach this where let's say there's $10,000 in property taxes that are owed, but there's also $400,000 equity in the property.
Exactly.
And so, you can work with family members to, hey, we're going to take care of this, or one may take care of this, or a family member may already be appointed if they had a will, correct? Mm-hmm. Yep. So, okay, good questions. Well, it's my turn to kind of throw a few at you. I like to play more of a reality type situation when I ask my questions as a co-host. So let's say, for example, I have a relative that passes and they leave the house to me. Two parts of this question. Let's say the house has equity, and let's say the house doesn't have equity. So part A, the house has plenty of equity. What do I do next? What is next in the process? And then if the house does not have equity, how do we handle that as well?
Unfortunately, we're in a market here in Seattle that, generally speaking, it's the former, and they have equity. House is left to you. Keep in mind, the house is not yours unless it's distributed to you and you have the deed, because a lot of people think that it's just, again, theirs because it says so in the will, or, and that's not necessarily the case.
So the probate process will then get me on the deed or put the deed in my name.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
And there's equity. That's great. It's your property. You can do with it as you choose.
So let's say there's a mortgage on the property.
There's a mortgage on the property.
I've got the deed, but the mortgage needs to be paid, period, or the bank will start foreclosing. So let's say, for example, my grandfather passes, gives me the house, I get the deed in my name, but he has a $200,000 mortgage on it. So I know that he's passed.
First you deal with, I probably wouldn't transfer that property automatically to the heir without dealing with the mortgage company first.
And just
and
informing them.
The mortgage company, has a secured interest.
Okay.
That secured interest doesn't go away because somebody is deceased, nor does the mortgage obligation go away because somebody is deceased. And again, just like we were talking about the taxes, that is a key situation where life insurance can come into play and be so important in making sure there's enough assets, say, to cover that mortgage payment for 6 or 8 months. while the probate proceeding is pending, so you don't put that on the heirs.
Okay. So I get the deed in my name. The next part of the process would just then be to sell the house, correct?
If you choose to.
If I choose to, or keep it, it's in my name.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If there is a mortgage on it, does that involve refinancing? Is that where I can come into play and have it refinanced, or what happens next? Or do we just keep it in their name? Do they add my name now to the note? How does that
Sometimes the
work?
mortgage company will agree to do that.
Okay.
Sometimes if, of course there are foreclosures in the estate process. And if there is a deficiency, the mortgage company can file what's known as a creditor's claim in the probate proceeding. And then any remaining assets that the deceased person had, the mortgage company can just be an unsecured creditor, just like any other creditor, and go in and try to get their share of the pie.
Wow.
Okay. Craziness. Yeah. This is these are questions and answers that we don't want to always deal with right now while we're alive and we're healthy and everything's good.
But it's
they need
exactly
to
when
be.
we should be dealing with those
That's what
questions.
that's exactly what we had Bill Kessler on here not too long ago, and that's what he said. Now's the time when you're coherent enough to deal with them, and you can actually put together a plan. So, no, great info. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. What are some of the most complicated situations when it comes to real estate during or in the probate process, and how do you kind of unwind such catastrophes, if you will?
Well, let's talk about a really basic one first that I find being very common, and that's the issue of property insurance.
Okay.
So let's say, grandma dies. She was alone in the house. So nobody's in the house right now. It's just a purely vacant property, and, they're dealing with it in a probate scenario. House burns to the ground.
Right.
So what do? You contact the property insurance folks, and they say, so what do you mean grandma wasn't living in the house for 3 months and it was completely vacant? Well, we have a clause here in our insurance contract that says that you need to notify us if the house was vacant, and so sorry, but you don't have coverage for this.
Wow.
It's really, really important. That's one of the first things that
wow.
I encourage our personal representatives to do, is to contact the insurance company, inform them of the death, inform them that the house is vacant, and you can get little rider policies to cover that period of the probate to avoid that horrible scenario from happening.
Wow.
Very important.
That's a huge aha right there. I mean, you wouldn't even think, wouldn't even have thought of that. It's crazy. Wow.
Another issue that happens, which you can all imagine, is that sometimes people just don't agree what to do. So let's say, pursuant to the will, there's 3 kids, and they split everything, so the 3 kids get the house. 2 of the kids are absolutely on the same page. They think, okay, this house is in horrible disrepair. Maybe the market's a little slow. Let's hang on to this thing for a while. Let's get it fixed. Then as the house gets better and the market recovers, then we can sell it. But, there's always that one kid.
Right.
The third wheel.
Yeah, the third wheel is like, no, I
Yep.
disagree with you, and I want my cash, and I want my cash now. I see that a lot. How do you handle that? Especially, ideally, there would be some liquidity in the estate, so you could just pay the third kid off and be able to have the other 2 kids handle the house the way they want. Sometimes, and we're really lucky here in Washington, we have some of the best, to give you a little background, we have some of the best probate proceedings in the United States in terms of how streamlined it is. And we also have a really wonderful thing called TEDRA. TEDRA stands for the Trust and Estates Dispute Resolution Act.
Okay.
It was one of its first in kind in the country, and it makes it pretty easy to be able to settle these sorts of disputes.
Okay.
And there's a whole procedure for how you can settle that. So ideally, the family can reach some sort of a settlement agreement so that it won't be torn apart. Other issues that I see, issues about, rental property.
Okay.
Suppose, the person who died owns residential rental property, and they own it in their own name. They never formed an LLC and put the property into that. So now, guess what? The estate owns the rental property. That means all the leases need to be reviewed. Those tenants need to be switched over because they're now tenants of the estate. The estate is the landlord. The rent checks need to go to the estate of the deceased person, and the personal representative is going to be the one who's responsible for everything related to that property
Wow.
until it gets addressed.
Wow.
Yeah. One thing that I've seen, which is just heartbreaking, and I've seen this a number of times, is homeowner dies, several kids. There's one child who, maybe is in his 30s or his 40s, and that kid has never left the house. That kid has been there since the time he was born. Some of these kids are mentally, or now they're adults, they're mentally disabled in some way. What do you do?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, do you let them just live there forever? How do you create mechanisms for that? You know, I've had issues where, the police had to come and take these, just screaming people out of the house, which it just tears the family up, and it's absolutely horrible.
Right.
So, I mean, again, advanced planning in terms of maybe a special needs trust, or how, the housing for this person can be handled upon death. Those things are so critical to avoid those sorts of tragic scenarios.
Wow.
So from what I'm hearing you say, if somebody doesn't have a will, that's really, I mean, obviously probate comes into play regardless, but that's really where it gets kind of crazy for you, where when things like this happen and there is no will in place and there's kids and there's assets, that is the probate process. Figuring out who gets what, how it's divided, how things are taken care of, correct?
That's
So
a very
coming
good
kind of
explanation. That's
full
terrific.
circle, that's kind of how it works out, huh?
Exactly.
Okay.
Very great explanation.
So I love what you just said. The easiest way to remedy, there's always going to be problems, but the easiest way to remedy most of them is to be proactive when you can. Proactive when you can put together a plan and a will.
And go talk to your attorney about it. And, these are things a lot of times that folks are embarrassed to talk to their attorney about. But it's exactly what the attorney needs to know.
Right.
Like, my child is a raging alcoholic.
Right.
And if I give them their share of the estate, they're going to go to Las Vegas and drink it in about a month. So how can we avoid that? If you don't have that conversation with the
Upfront,
attorney,
right.
how in the world is the attorney going to know?
So just
be able to-
giving minor distributions versus, here's
Or
your
putting it in a
200,000.
trust.
Or there you go.
Right.
Okay, good. Okay, so here's the thing. I want to kind of wrap up with Stacy and give kind of a plug. We love to do this with all of our guests. I want you to reach out to her. She's super valuable, tons of resources here. So Stacy Romberg, again, attorney at law, is a Seattle, Washington-based virtual law firm. The firm represents clients in estate planning, probate, and business law. Stacy and her team are enthusiastically dedicated to developing positive and productive long-term relationships with great clients. Schedule your initial consultation at stacyromberg.com. I'm not going to necessarily spell that out on air, but we're going to have all of her contact info on our website, on our social media page. Stacy, closing thoughts. We've got about 20 seconds.
Well, thank you for having me on today.
Yeah.
It was
Thank you
my
for coming.
pleasure.
Absolutely.
And I hope through this people understand a little bit more about the probate process and that they realize they need to do some advanced planning.
Well, you did a great job. I learned a ton. StacyRomberg.com. I am going to spell it out. STACEY, Romberg, ROMBERG.com. Reach out to us. Reach out to Stacy. She's a huge resource. Thank you so much for coming on today.
And it'll also be on SeattleRealEstateRadio.com.
Yep, on the site. So, hey, we'll
Thank
see
you.
Yeah, we'll see you next week. Until then, have a great
Stay
week.
tuned. There's more Seattle Real Estate Radio coming up. We're back with more Seattle Real Estate Radio with your hosts, Christian Nossum and Dan Keller.
All right, hey, welcome back to Seattle Real Estate Radio on KKOL 1300 Business Radio. You know what? I wrapped up the last segment thinking that we were done for the day. The day. And we're
Working
not.
too hard, man.
We're back to wrap up real quick for a few minutes. But I want you to stick with me here for the next few minutes because this is kind of important. I'm going to give a mortgage minute in a few moments. But I kind of want to recap that, what we just talked about. Probate is huge. This ties into a conversation we had, with Bill Kessler. He is an attorney about a year ago. And the one big takeaway from him is get it done now while you're young, while you're healthy, because you never know what could happen.
Right. And, Stacy, she was so knowledgeable. Thank you for coming down. It's a crazy process. There's a lot of loops that you have to jump through. If you don't plan accordingly, this could be a big thing when that time does come.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's you just never know what can happen. I've gone through the process with Jenny and I. We've got the whole life insurance thing set up. We've got the will and everything set up. And it's important, especially if you have kids, and it's important when you have assets, that if something were to happen, I could care less about my assets. I care about my kids. Right. And part of when you go through phases of life, you go through different phases where you're building a career, you're building assets, you're growing them, you're investing, and then you want to leave a legacy. I certainly don't want to leave a crap show for everybody to clean up, when I pass. And that's kind of what I heard from her is the benefit of having a will, the benefit of being organized now. My kids know what they're getting. They know where they're going. If something were to happen to them while they're young, or to me while they're young, there's some organization and structure around what I could only imagine would be absolute chaos if something were to happen to Jenny and I at the same time.
Well, proper planning, it creates clear-cut, defined lines, and it makes the process so much easier, so much easier.
What was your biggest takeaway from talking with her?
My biggest takeaway is...
I mean, you're a youngster, man.
Yeah.
You're a youngster, so you're like, whatever, death, whatever, kids, marriage, what?
I know, but I'm going to run into it sooner or later.
Yeah.
And like I said, I see estate sales all over every week.
Yeah.
Every day I see at least one, So it happens. It happens. So my biggest takeaway is, the 5 Ps. Prior preparation prevents poor
There you go.
performance.
That's
That's my coach used to say to me, but anyway.
Yeah. That's the truth. It's the truth in anything. So, no, that's great. So, well, let's talk mortgages.
Mortgage. Wait, hold on. Let's.
Welcome to this week's Mortgage Minute with Dan Keller.
All right, give it to us straight.
All right,
What do you got?
So this week's Mortgage Minute by Dan Keller. My MLO number is 115349. Mortgage rates have kind of leveled off. They haven't gone up. They're not necessarily going up. We're still continuing to see poor to average economic news. I've said this for the last year. Keep an eye on the economic data, economic news that you're seeing hit the news, and that's going to be an indicator of what's going to be happening with rates. It is an election year. I think everybody knows that, unless you've been living under a rock. Which sometimes I wish I was living under a rock so I'd have to deal with both parties and the chaos between the two of them.
You know what's the worst thing about election year?
Gosh.
When you look at the Facebook posts, it's like, I have to get off of this. Yeah. I can't look at these posts. I mean, everybody has an opinion, and they're entitled to their opinion, but stick
with the facts, not the memes.
Right.
The memes are funny, but come on, man.
Exactly.
Give me some facts. But anyhow, so... we're continuing to see, again, I'm going to come back to this, economic data that just does not support higher interest rates. We're seeing housing data that just isn't, it's just not where it should be. So until we start seeing it, I will say this, the second something changes for the positive, look out. Rates are going to go from where they're at in the mid to upper threes right now to probably jumping by over a point.
Wow.
Overnight. It's not going to be a slow, gradual process of rates going up. They're going to go up quickly. So rates take a long time. I tell my clients this. They can take weeks, months, years to drop, but they can go up substantially overnight. So just be careful. I tell my clients right now, if you're looking to purchase a home, now is a great time. Find the home. Lock yourself in on a very good low 30-year fixed rate. Historically low 30-year fixed rate, and save some money over the life of the loan. If you wait, you're testing the market. So, and you don't want to do that. You don't want to play the market, because I can tell you that we are at the bottom, and when we go up, it'll be more expensive over the life of the loan. So that's the case. The other thing I wanted to talk about was something we opened up the segment on today with home values. Home values are up. Over 70% of Americans have 20% equity or more. And what that means is if you have equity, if you have an interest rate from the past that's 2, 3, 4 years old, now might be a time to look into lowering it. So one of the things that I do, I'd be happy to do I call it a total cost analysis. It's a loan comparison where I take your current mortgage and give you 2, 3, 4 options to look at, whether it might be lowering the term, whether it might be pulling cash out, removing private mortgage insurance, whatever it may be, to show you how to save some money on your mortgage. So I'm asking all my clients and viewers, if you have any questions on that, just reach out and I can get you some information on maybe saving some money on your mortgage.
All right.
That's my mortgage minute.
Your mortgage minute that took 3.
Yeah, they always do. They always do, man.
Well, thank you for that.
And another plug, keep following Christian and I. We've got another homebuyer class coming up here in the next week or so. If you know anybody who wants to learn more about the home buying process, you do them with us now. You see how informative they are.
They're very good. I will be a part of that.
And it helped you. You just went
class.
through the homebuyer process. You're young. What you guys don't realize is Les is a youngster, and you were just a part of buying a home, your first home. And what was one big aha that you learned out of that experience?
The emotions. Emotions. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Crazy, huh?
They're very crazy. It definitely helped me see the home buying process though, from a different perspective, from a client's perspective, for sure. What they're dealing with. So now I'm able to empathize with clients and what they're dealing with.
I told you that from the beginning. This is going to be great for you now because you now have gone through the exact same steps that every single with me. Obviously, I managed your mortgage, and so that was a plus.
Right.
But you got to actually see in detail every step of the way.
Absolutely.
New disclosures being sent out, rate log, how just how everything occurred from appraisal to that taking a little bit longer than normal. So to the closing procedure, which. I was at I with you guys.
You were. And that was actually pretty cool.
It was like 8 a.m.
Yeah,
that was early. You rolled right out of bed.
I had the groggy face on.
You did.
Yeah, it was cool though. Thank you for helping us through that process though. You made as many hiccups as we encountered with that. You made the process. You and the team made the process so seamless. So thank you guys.
I think
for that.
that's what a professional does. I think what you find out as a listener that Les and Christian and I in both of our industries, we encounter hurdles, we encounter turbulence, and our number one job is to navigate you through and around that without you feeling the bumps.
Absolutely.
And you will feel some bumps, but at least you'll know they're coming. You'll be prepared for them. And you'll know that you got a great pilot to navigate through. It's
all communication, discussion. If you, like you said, if you set the expectation up front, then you know what to expect throughout the process. I never like any of my clients to be blindsided by something like, whoa, I didn't expect that, So it's definitely, we like to educate. That's all it is.
You guys have any hot listings coming on the market? Anything big coming up?
In about a month here or two.
Working on a couple?
Yeah, we have some stuff rolling through. So
good. Right here in Seattle? Where you at? What areas?
Edmonds.
Nice.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
A little north.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great, man. Well, good. Well, hey, we appreciate everyone listening in. What I want to ask every single one of our listeners, kind of a favor, we always poll our listeners and my past clients. So any topics that you'd like us to talk on, any professionals that you'd like us to go, hit up and interview and have them come on the show, please let us know. You can find us you can message us at seattlerealestateradio.com. We would look forward to that. I think there are a lot of things happening in the market. We do have another financial planner coming on board here soon. He's going to give some information on how to best manage your 401k, which is huge, and that's all we're going to talk about: 401k, IRAs. So, if you have any needs, wants, wishes, let us know. It's been awesome hanging out with you for the last hour, and
you as well, my friend.
Yeah. Speaking on behalf of Christian, who's on a beach somewhere, we'll see you next week at 3:00.
Bye-bye, Seattle.
To contact the show or for more information, visit SeattleRealEstateRadio.com. That's SeattleRealEstateRadio.com. And be sure to tune in again next Monday at 3 for more Seattle Real Estate Radio with your hosts, Christian Nossum and Dan Keller, right here on Business Radio 1300 KKOL.